I thought if I just hid it, it would be over. But when my daughter was admitted to the hospital, the doctor on duty was the one man I had ever run away from. And then, with just one look, one small birthmark, everything came crashing down. That night, Paris was weeping with a heavy rain. The wind whistled through the cracks of the window, gusting into the small 10-square-meter studio apartment where my daughter and I were living. Outside, the distant wail of an ambulance siren echoed through the streets. Inside, my daughter Sophie lay quietly on the single bed, her body burning like a hot coal. Her face was flushed, her breathing was shallow, and her small limbs trembled. I placed my palm on her forehead and it felt like touching a stove. This wasn't right. I mumbled, my hands shaking as I dialed for a taxi. Sophie had never had a fever this high. I frantically dressed her in warmer clothes, wrapped her in a blanket, and ran out into the rain. The thin coat I wore was no match for the cutting wind, but my mind had only one thought. I had to save my child. The taxi sped through the slick, wet streets. I held Sophie tight, my heart clenching every time she let out a soft moan. Raindrops streaked down the window, mixing with the tears I hadn't realized were falling. The hospital was a blaze of lights in the Parisian night. I burst into the emergency room like a madwoman, the sterile antiseptic smell hitting me, a smell that had haunted me since my university days. Sophie was placed on a gurney. I rushed to the reception desk, filled out forms, signed papers, and stumbled back to a chair in the waiting area. My vision blurred with worry, and I could only hear the pounding of my own heart until a voice called out, "The mother of Sophie Martin, please come to examination room 3. I picked up my daughter, my legs trembling. The door to room 3 was slightly ajar, casting a stark white light onto the back of a man in a white coat who was focused on his computer. That silhouette. It was like a photograph that had been imprinted on my dreams for 5 years. As I stepped into the room, the air seemed to freeze. Not from the air conditioning, but because the man had just turned around in his chair. Those eyes were still deep, but no longer warm. That handsome, angular face was now as cold as ice. I stood frozen, my heart hammering against my ribs. My lips trembled, but I couldn't speak. "Please place the child on the examination bed," he said, his voice low and devoid of any emotion. Julian. It was him. The man I had loved with all the passion of my youth. The man I had left behind one sunny summer, without a single word of explanation. I silently placed Sophie on the bed. My hands shook as I unbuttoned her clothes, trying to hold back my tears. Julian put on his stethoscope and leaned down to examine her. A faint scent of mint from his coat drifted over the same familiar scent from the days when I would rest my head on his chest under the trees on campus. Her fever is almost 40 degrees. Signs of severe tonsillitis. "She needs to be monitored closely," he said, still not looking at me. His gaze was fixed on Sophie, a strange mix of professional concern and a flicker of something else, something that looked like pain. I bowed my head, about to thank him, when Sophie weakly grabbed his hand. "Mr. Doctor," she whispered. "You smell nice." My breath caught in my throat. Julian froze. His hand trembled slightly, and his eyes changed. "Go to the counter and complete the admission forms for her. Now." He handed me a form, his voice raspy and much colder than before. As our hands brushed, a jolt shot through me. That feeling, too, belonged to the past. Outside the examination room, I slumped onto a cold bench in the hallway. The rain outside continued to fall. I buried my head in my hands, silent tears streaming down my face. I never imagined that after 5 years, the first person to touch my daughter would be Julian, the man I left without a word, while carrying his child. I sat there, my mind reeling. I had just collided with the past I had tried so hard to bury. It wasn't in a photograph or a dream, but in the flesh, his eyes, his voice, his very breath. Julian was right in front of me, and I could only stand there like a stranger, too flustered to even look up. Strangely, he showed no surprise, no flicker of recognition. Not a furrowed brow, not a single question. "No, Amelia, is that you?" Not even a long time no see. just the detached tone of a doctor doing his job. Had he truly not recognized me? Or did he recognize me and choose to pretend he didn't? I didn't know which hurt more. When I returned after completing the paperwork, Sophie had been moved to a room. She lay sleeping peacefully, a small tube helping her breathe. She looked so fragile. I sat beside her, wiping the sweat from her forehead, my heart heavy not just from her illness but from his presence. Suddenly, there was a soft knock on the door. It was him, still in his white coat, his expression unreadable. He had none of the warmth of the university student who once held me under the campus trees. "Good evening. I'm here for the second checkup," he said formally. I nodded, my lips trembling. I avoided his gaze, instinctively trying to shield Sophie's face with a blanket. Julian approached, his movements professional and precise. He placed the stethoscope on her chest, checked the monitor, and made notes. Every action was that of a dedicated doctor, yet there was no warmth in his eyes. They were cold and hard as stone. He gave a slight nod and turned to leave. Just as he reached the door, I heard him say softly, "If there are any issues during the night, press the call button. I'm on duty until 6 a.m. His voice was the same, yet it was no longer his. The door closed gently, but the sound echoed in my soul like the slamming of fate. I was once his everything. What was I now? Just a single mother who happened to bring her child to his hospital. Or perhaps this was life's punishment for me. Late that night, I saw a tall figure walking slowly down the empty hospital corridor. It was Julian, no longer in his white coat, just a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. His eyes, deep and cold, met mine. "Aren't you going home?" he asked. "The nurses are here to watch her. Staying all night will only exhaust you." His voice was flat, as if speaking to a stranger. "I'm fine. I want to stay near her," I whispered. A moment of silence passed. He turned to leave, then paused. "Where do you live?" "I'll drive you." I was startled. "No, thank you, I can manage. It's nearly midnight. There are no taxis," he cut me off, already walking ahead. Hesitantly, I followed. We walked to the car park. The rain had stopped, but the night air was cold. He stopped in front of a modern gray Peugeot. I quietly got in, fastening my seatbelt. The silence in the car was thick, broken only by the soft classical music from the radio, the same music I used to play when we studied together. I stared out the window at the familiar streets of Paris, which now felt alien. I didn't dare look at him, but in my peripheral vision I saw his hands on the steering wheel. What made my heart stop was the simple silver band on his left ring finger. A wedding ring. He was married. A sharp pain shot through me. Though I had no right to feel jealous, my heart still ached. He had a new life, a new family, and here I was, rushing my child to the emergency room in the middle of the night. I bit my lip, forcing back the tears. I had been strong for so many years. I couldn't break down over a ring. "Turn at the next intersection. Then it's 2 alleys to the left," I said quietly. He followed my directions without a word. The car stopped in front of the old apartment complex where I lived. I quickly opened the door. "Thank you. I'll go now." "Wait." His hand lightly touched mine, stopping me. I turned, and his eyes were no longer cold, but strange and hard to read. "What time are you coming back to the hospital tomorrow?" "I can pick you up." Confused, I shook my head. "No, it's okay. Thank you." I pulled my hand away and almost ran from the car, not daring to look back at that silver ring. Only when I was safely inside my apartment, with my back against the closed door, did I allow myself to breathe. My chest felt tight, as if I'd been punched. Perhaps I was wrong to think I was strong enough to see him again. Perhaps a part of my heart had never stopped loving Julian. The next morning, I arrived at the hospital early. Sophie was already sitting up in bed, her eyes bright, humming to herself. "Feeling better, my love?" I asked, relieved to feel her forehead was cool. "Yes, Mummy. You know what? Last night I dreamed that the doctor took me to the park. He even gave me a piggyback ride." I faltered. "That must have been a nice dream from the medicine, sweetie." No, I remember it clearly. He looks just like the drawing of my friend Leo's dad, Sophie said innocently. I froze. I had always told her that her father worked far away, but she had made the connection herself, just from a look, a presence. What's the doctor's name, Mummy? She asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. His name is Julian, I said, pretending to pour water. Mummy doesn't know him. He has sad eyes, just like you sometimes when you sigh, Sophie added. Her childish observation was like a small knife to my heart, and his eyes, when he looked at Sophie, there was something there. Sophie, I asked gently, what do you think of Dr. Julian? He's nice, she chirped. He was so gentle when my throat hurt, but he looks sad. Maybe he misses his own daughter. I forced a laugh, but tears welled up. She didn't know that she was the child he had once dreamed of, the child I had secretly given birth to in a small town 5 years ago, without ever telling her father. That evening, as I was tucking Sophie in, she whispered, Mummy, if I see Dr. Julian again, can I call him Papa? I was stunned, unable to answer. In the darkness, I just held her tight, because my own heart had just admitted a painful truth. I was still in love with my child's father. That night, after Sophie was asleep, I messaged my old friend Chloe. Are you free? I need to talk. Urgently. An hour later, I was in Chloe's small, cozy apartment near the sea. The walls were covered in photos from our university days, pictures of us laughing, of trips we'd taken. My eyes landed on a small frame on her bedside table. It was a picture of Julian and me in our final year of university. He was reading, and I was leaning on his shoulder, smiling as if I didn't have a care in the world. You still have this? I asked softly. Why would I throw it away? It was a part of our lives, Chloe said, handing me a cup of hot ginger tea. The warm, spicy drink brought back a flood of memories. Back then, I was an architecture student, headstrong and a little wild. Julian was a quiet, profound medical student. We met in the university library on a rainy afternoon. We fell into a rhythm. I learned to take the bus and eat cheap street food to save money to help him with his final year's tuition. He taught me first aid and stayed up all night helping me build my final project models. We planned our future in this very apartment. A small house, 2 children, a garden full of flowers. So why did you two break up? Chloe's voice pulled me back to the present. I tightened my grip on the mug. My father had a stroke. His company went bankrupt. My mother had a breakdown. In the middle of all that chaos, Julian's mother came to see me. I remember she didn't like you, Chloe said. She loved her son, I corrected. She cried in front of me, telling me that Julian was the family's only hope. She said if he was held back because of me, she would never be able to rest in peace. So you just left. I nodded, tears finally falling. I didn't dare tell him. I was afraid if he chose me, his future would be ruined like my parents'. I couldn't bear to be his burden, so I left. I changed my number, moved away, and it was only then that I found out I was pregnant. Chloe placed a hand on my shoulder. Some things don't disappear just because you run from them, Amelia. Your past never left. It's just been waiting for you to turn around and face it. He's not married, Chloe said after a moment. That silver ring isn't a wedding band. He's worn it since university. He said it was a reminder to himself to live an honorable life. My heart skipped a beat. Had I been wrong all along? What are you waiting for? Chloe asked gently. That child has a right to know her father, and you have a right to love again. Don't punish yourself with old fears. Perhaps she was right. It was time to stop running. I owed my daughter an answer, and I owed Julian one last confrontation after 5 years of silence. I was in a cafe trying to finish a design project when my phone rang. Hello, Miss Martin? This is Director Theron from the Paris Central Hospital. I was told you designed the renovation for the Lefebvre private clinic? Yes, that's correct, I answered, my heart starting to beat faster. We're planning a complete renovation of our pediatric wing. It's a large project, funded by a private donor. I've seen your portfolio and I'm very impressed. We need a space that feels healing, not just clinical. As a mother, I believe you understand that. My throat went dry. The pediatric wing. I knew who worked there. Oh, and I should mention, he continued, the head of the project is Dr. Julian Renaud. I believe you two have already met. My heart sank. Yes, I know him. So, can you come to the hospital tomorrow at 2 p.m. for a preliminary meeting? After a long pause, I whispered, I'll arrange it. That afternoon I couldn't draw a single line. The thought of working professionally with the man I had loved and abandoned was terrifying. It felt less like a work challenge and more like a punishment. Or maybe it was a chance. Fate had pushed me back into that hallway, under his gaze. Now, it was my turn to walk towards him. Even if it was just as a colleague, it was a way to start over, or to finally find a proper end. The hospital conference room was cold and sterile. I sat at one end of the long table. Julian sat at the other, his face an unreadable mask. On the projector, I presented my designs. Pastel-colored hallways, walls painted with friendly animals, and a special room for children afraid of needles. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. I looked at Julian. His eyes were as cold as the overhead lights. What material are you planning for the flooring? He asked, not looking at me. Antibacterial vinyl. It's soft, quiet, and non-slip. I've negotiated a price 18% below market value. He nodded slightly. Remove the mini-play area. That room should be a waiting lounge for parents. We don't have the spare space. I flinched. The play area was a key request from the donors. But I'm the one who runs the ward day to day. He cut me off, looking directly at me for the first time. I know sick children don't have the energy to play. Their parents, however, need a space to breathe. I bit my lip. This wasn't about the design. This was him building a wall between us. I nodded and adjusted the plan on my laptop. For the next 2 hours, he scrutinized every detail I presented. His voice was calm, but his criticisms were sharp and relentless, each one a small blow to my heart. He who had once praised my drawings now found fault in every line. After the meeting, as I was packing up, his voice came from behind me. Miss Martin, I want the entire design for the inpatient corridor redone. The deadline for the revision is next Thursday. He turned and left without another word. I stood there for a moment, feeling utterly exhausted. I wasn't sure if he was unhappy with my work, or if he was punishing me in the only way he could, with calm, professional cruelty. A few days later, I was working in the temporary office the hospital had provided when the door swung open. Julian stood there, leaning against the frame, his eyes like ice. "Whose child is she?" he asked, his voice devoid of any warmth. My heart stopped. I knew this question would come. I just never imagined it would be so blunt, so cold. I saw the fury simmering beneath his calm exterior. I tried to sound casual. An old boyfriend's. His eyes narrowed. "Before or after you sent that breakup text?" I couldn't answer. Silence was my only refuge. "How long are you going to stay silent?" he pressed, his voice growing hoarse. "Or do you think I don't have the right to know?" "A right to know when?" I shot back, my voice trembling. When I was collapsing with no one by my side? When I was alone in my cold apartment, staring at a positive pregnancy test, shaking with fear? When I had to find a hospital by myself and sign the emergency C-section consent forms alone? Where were you then? "You never gave me a chance to know," he retorted, his voice tight with rage. "You disappeared. I searched for you like a madman." "I was scared," I yelled. "I was scared your mother would find me again, that she would beg me again to let you go. I couldn't go through that a second time." The room fell silent. He stood motionless. Then he turned and walked away, leaving the door open. I heard his footsteps fade down the hall, but I knew this wasn't over. The look in his eyes wasn't hatred. It was doubt, and I knew he wouldn't let it go. In the following days, I felt a strange presence, a feeling of being watched. Then one day, at the supermarket, Sophie was sitting in the trolley playing. Suddenly, she squealed, "Mummy, it's the doctor!" I whipped around. At the end of the aisle, Julian stood holding a carton of milk. He wasn't looking at me. His entire focus was on Sophie, and his gaze was no longer cold or angry. It was something deep and raw. It was paternal. I quickly pushed the trolley away, my heart hammering. I knew he had begun his search for the truth, and I was terrified that if he found it, he would never forgive me. The afternoon sky was gray and heavy. Sophie was sleeping, and I was sitting by the window when the doorbell rang. It was Chloe, her coat damp from the drizzle, holding a steaming paper cup. "Ginger tea for a heart that's about to break," she said with a weak smile. I told her everything: the meeting, Julian's questions, his appearances. She listened patiently. When I finished, she sighed. "You think he doesn't know you were found? You disappeared on everyone, me included. You thought you were being clever, but you were just a scared girl trying to act tough. I didn't want him to find me in this miserable state," I whispered. When I left, I thought I was doing something noble, protecting him from being burdened by me. Now I see, I was just a coward. "Good," Chloe nodded. "Admitting you're a coward is the first step to being brave. So what now?" "I don't know," I confessed. "I'm scared if he knows, he won't forgive me. But if he doesn't, how long can I keep this up?" "He's not angry the way you think he is," she said softly. "You can see it in the way he looks at her. There's something in a man's eyes when he looks at his own child that can't be faked. He doesn't hate you, Amelia. He's in pain. And people in pain often act like strangers." Her words tore through the armor I had built for 5 years. I had always told myself I left for his own good, but the truth was, I left because I was too weak, too afraid to be seen in my most vulnerable state. "You don't have to be strong anymore," Chloe said. "You just need to admit you were wrong, and if you want to, you can fix it. Julian doesn't need a perfect explanation. He just needs the truth." That night I couldn't sleep. Memories I had buried deep came flooding back. It was a hot afternoon in early July. I was waiting for Julian at a cafe near the university to celebrate the end of our final exams. But the person who arrived wasn't Julian. It was his mother. She was a small, stern woman, with eyes as sharp as a knife. She got straight to the point. "You're young, you'll understand one day, but for now, please let my son go." I was speechless. "My son is brilliant," she continued, her voice sharp. "He's this family's only hope. He's had to work 3 times as hard as anyone else to get where he is. Your love is becoming too big a shadow. You come from a wealthy family. You can live comfortably without him. But he can't. Every time you buy him things, every time you pay for coffee, he loses a piece of himself. He's struggling." She placed an envelope on the table. "This is some money I've saved. Take it and disappear from his life. Don't let him lose his future because of you." In that moment, I felt like a thief, stealing the pride of the man I loved. As I stood to leave, she suddenly dropped to her knees in the middle of the cafe. "I'm begging you," she cried out for all to see. "If you ever loved him, let him live his own life. Don't force him to carry another burden." I never told Julian about that. It was a wound I let fester inside me. That night, I decided to leave. I sent him a short text, along with a picture of me laughing with an old friend, to make him believe I had moved on. I wanted him to hate me. Only through hate could he let go. Now, 5 years later, lying next to the child he never knew, I didn't know how to face the truth. I still loved him, but I was terrified he no longer loved me. That same night, in the quiet pediatric ward, Julian couldn't focus. His mind kept drifting back to the little girl named Sophie, the way she had called out to him in the supermarket, her bright, familiar smile. He remembered the first time he'd examined her. As he'd listened to her heart, she'd whispered, "You look like the drawing of my papa." He'd dismissed it then, but now the words echoed in his mind. He closed his eyes, and an image flashed in his memory. A birthmark. A faint, coffee-colored, teardrop-shaped mark on the back of her left hand. He'd seen it briefly that first day, but had been too busy to pay it much attention. Now, the image was crystal clear. The birthmark was identical to his own. The same shape, the same location, the same color. His heart began to pound. He scrambled to his computer and pulled up Sophie's file. Name: Sophie Martin. Date of birth: February, 5 years ago. Mother: Amelia Martin. Father: blank. His hands started to shake. February, 5 years ago. That was when she had vanished. That was when he had received the text message that broke his world. He had believed she had left him for someone else. But now, a child with his eyes, his smile, and his exact birthmark. The world seemed to crumble around him. He sank into his chair, a cold sweat breaking out on his back. If what he was thinking was true, then Amelia had hidden his child from him for 5 years. He had been denied every first moment, her first cry, her first step, her first word. He felt a surge of rage, followed by a wave of devastating pain. His own child had been robbed of the right to know her father. He picked up his phone to call her, then stopped. What would he say? How could he even begin to ask? He left his office and walked slowly down the long, empty corridor until he stood outside her room. Through the glass, he could see the small, sleeping figure. The woman who had been his entire world was now holding the most important part of him hostage. Julian didn't cry, but a storm was silently gathering in his eyes. The rain started suddenly, a torrential downpour that hammered against the roof of my apartment. A sharp, insistent knock echoed through the room. 3 heavy, deliberate knocks. I knew who it was before I opened the door. Julian. He stood there, his shirt soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead, his eyes burning into mine. "Is she mine?" he asked, his voice raw with restrained emotion. I was frozen. The question I had dreaded for 5 years was finally here, spoken in his voice, right in front of me. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. He stepped inside, his eyes scanning the small room, my drawings, Sophie's toys, a framed photo of her smiling. His gaze locked on the photo, and his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. "I'm asking you again," he said, his voice dropping to a low growl. "Is she mine?" I took a step back. "Yes," I whispered in a single, trembling breath. "Sophie is your daughter." The air crackled. He turned away, his entire body rigid. I could see his shoulders shaking with either rage or pain. "Why?" he asked, his voice a broken whisper. "Why did you hide her from me? Why did you let me live for 5 years believing the woman I loved betrayed me, while my own child was growing up without knowing who her father was?" I rushed towards him, tears streaming down my face. "I was scared of your mother. Scared you would lose everything because of me. I was trying to protect you." "Protect me?" He let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "You call robbing me of the right to be a father protecting me? Do you have any idea what the last 5 years have been like? I looked everywhere for you. I thought I was going crazy. I'd look at this ring," he held up his hand, the silver band gleaming in the dim light, "and wonder if I had dreamed it all up. If your love had ever even been real." "It was real. I never stopped loving you," I sobbed. "But your mother." She came to me. She knelt. She begged me to leave. She said I would be a burden that would hold you back. I thought if you hated me, it would hurt less. Julian stared at me, his eyes turning red. The anger in them slowly dissolved, replaced by a profound, bottomless pain. He shook his head slowly, his voice choked with emotion. "You fool, Amelia. Love isn't about running away. You said you wanted to protect me, but did you ever think about her? Our daughter grew up without a father. You call that protection?" I collapsed onto the floor, too weak to stand. He walked over and looked down at me one last time, his eyes a mixture of warmth and cold, of love and hate. "I don't know whether to be angry with you or to pity you," he said, almost in a whisper. "But the one thing I know for sure is that I can't trust you anymore." He turned and walked out, the wind and rain rushing in as he opened the door. His silhouette disappeared into the stormy night, leaving me in a room soaked with rain and tears. The sound of the door closing was the sound of my life ending. A week after that night, Julian had vanished from his hospital duties, taking personal leave. I didn't dare ask about him. That afternoon there was a gentle knock on my door. It was Julian's mother, Mrs. Renaud. She looked thinner than I remembered, her face etched with a weariness that hadn't been there 5 years ago. I know everything, she said, her voice slow and heavy. I know that Sophie is my granddaughter. I've known for a long time. I stared at her, stunned. Since when? Since she was 3, she confessed, her gaze distant. I saw you both at the market one day. I saw the birthmark on her hand, identical to Julian's when he was a boy. In that moment, I knew. Why didn't you say anything? I stammered. Because I knew I was wrong, she said, her eyes filled with regret. All those years ago, I begged you to leave him, thinking it was for the best. But when I saw that little girl, my own blood, I realized I had robbed my son of something irreplaceable. Tears began to well in my eyes. I've watched you both from a distance for years, she continued. I know that no one can replace a father's love, but I also know that no one can replace the strength of a mother who has raised a child alone. I broke down sobbing. You did what you thought was right, she said, handing me a handkerchief. I'm not here to blame you. I'm here to say something I should have said 5 years ago. I'm sorry. Those 2 words hung in the air, and for the first time in years I felt a weight lift from my chest. Julian is very angry, she said softly. He needs time. But he loves that little girl. You know he does. She stood up and placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. Just give him a chance. Don't be afraid anymore. The one to blame is me, not you. That night, the air was thick and hot. I had just put Sophie to bed when she called out weakly, "Mummy, I feel dizzy." I turned to see her face pale, her eyes rolling back as her body began to convulse. In a flash of pure instinct, I scooped her up and ran, my bare feet slapping against the concrete stairs of the apartment building. I don't remember how I got to the hospital, only the feeling of her small body in my arms and one name screaming in my mind. Julian. In the emergency room, everything was a blur. Sophie was rushed away, and I was left standing outside, helpless. Suddenly, the doors burst open, and he was there, Julian. Not the cold doctor from the meetings, not the heartbroken man from that rainy night. He moved like a storm, pushing past a nurse and immediately taking charge. Prepare an IV anti-seizure medication. Monitor vitals every 15 minutes. Report to me directly. His voice was sharp, commanding. I watched, trembling, as he leaned down and took Sophie's small left hand in his, the hand with the teardrop birthmark. His fingers shook as he held it. Just then, Sophie's eyes fluttered open. "Doctor," she whispered. He nodded, his emotions barely in check. "I'm here. It's okay. I'm right here." I saw his lips tighten, and then a single tear fell from his eye, landing directly on her birthmark. He bowed his head, resting his forehead on the side of the bed, his hand still gripping hers as if holding on for dear life. It was the first time I had ever seen Julian cry. Not for us, not for our lost love, but for the tiny child in that hospital bed who was a part of him. After her condition stabilized, he brought me a glass of water. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. I nodded, unable to speak. The doctor on duty said if we had been a few minutes later. "Don't," he interrupted. "It's okay now." He paused, his eyes fixed on Sophie. "I don't blame you for not calling me. I wish I had been here sooner." Tears fell silently down my cheeks. In the cold light of the hospital room, I watched him sit by her bed, his hand never leaving hers. All the anger, all the distance, it all melted away in that moment. He didn't need words. Just being there, holding his daughter's hand, was all the love, all the forgiveness I had ever hoped for. That evening, the sun cast a golden glow over the hospital gardens. I was walking hand in hand with Sophie, who was still a little weak but smiling again. In the distance, under the shade of a large plane tree, I saw him, Julian. He stood there, watching us, his expression soft. Beside him was his mother, smiling gently at her granddaughter. She held a small, hand-knitted bear. As we approached, she sat down and gave the toy to Sophie. "I made this for you," she said. "I hope you like it." Sophie hugged the bear. "Mummy, can I call her Grandma?" she asked. Before I could answer, Mrs. Renault pulled Sophie into a hug, her eyes glistening. Of course, my dear. Call me whatever feels most loving. Julian came and stood beside me. A leaf fell from the tree and landed in my hair. He gently picked it out, his fingers brushing against my shoulder. My mother wants to invite you both to live with us, he said quietly. I've renovated the old house. There's a room for Sophie and a studio for you to draw. I looked at him, my heart full. This was everything I had ever yearned for. Trust, forgiveness, and a love that was shown, not just spoken. Are you sure? I whispered. Not because of duty? He shook his head, his gaze steady. I've wanted you back for a long time. When I saw you with Sophie, how you've raised her, I realized you don't need me to atone for the past. You need me to walk forward with you. And I need that too. He sat down and called Sophie over. She scrambled onto his lap. Is the doctor going to stay with us forever? She asked. He looked at me, then back at our daughter and smiled. The doctor wants to stay with you for the rest of his life. Will you let him? Sophie nodded enthusiastically. Yes, but you have to eat your vegetables with me. Mummy says you have to eat vegetables to be a good person. He laughed and pulled her into a tight hug. I sat down next to them, my hand finding his. In that moment, under the falling leaves, a silent, sweet promise was made. We would move forward, not to forget the past, but to live the love we had lost along the way. That evening, Chloe came by. She handed me a small, time-worn box. Julian gave this to me to give to you, that night 5 years ago, but you left before I had the chance. I kept it all this time. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, on a piece of white silk, lay a simple silver ring and a folded piece of paper. It was his handwriting. Amelia, I know you're scared and tired, and maybe you want to give up. But if you're reading this, it means you haven't left yet. I don't want to blame you or ask why. I just want you to know I'm here. This ring, I was going to give it to you after graduation, at that picnic we planned. I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to be you. If you ever find the strength to come back, just knock. This door will never be locked. Julian. I collapsed over the table, sobbing. For all these years, I thought I was the only one holding on. But he had been there too, waiting with a promise I had run away from. That night I sent him a text. I just got the box from 5 years ago. The ring is still here, the letter is still here, and I'm still here. If I knock now, is that door still open? The next day, I took Sophie to Mrs. Renaud's house. The small house in the quiet alley was just as I remembered, but the gate was freshly painted, and the bougainvillea I had loved was now in full, glorious bloom. The lunch was simple fish soup, roasted chicken, fresh bread, but the atmosphere was more fulfilling than any feast. There were no more awkward silences, no more stolen glances, just the sound of Sophie's laughter as Julian carefully deboned her fish, the sound of his mother urging me to eat more, and the sound of my own heart finally at peace. Mummy, let's live here forever, Sophie declared. It has Grandma and Papa and flowers. Julian looked at me, his eyes filled with a hopeful, gentle question. I looked back at him and smiled a small, quiet smile. Perhaps I was finally ready. On a Sunday morning not long after, the sun streamed into our new kitchen. The smell of fresh toast filled the air, mixed with the sound of Sophie's little feet padding across the floor. She was drawing at the table, her tongue sticking out in concentration. When breakfast was over, she shyly handed me a folded piece of paper. On the front was a lopsided heart. Inside was a drawing of 3 people holding hands under a house with a curly plume of smoke. Above them, a smiling sun and 3 red hearts. At the bottom, in purple ink, she had written, "My family. I love you, Mummy and Papa." Tears streamed down my face. I had prepared myself to be a single mother for the rest of my life. But this simple drawing broke down all my defenses. Before I could look up, Julian was kneeling in front of me. In his hand was the small white box. The box from 5 years ago. He opened it and took out the silver ring. It was no longer shiny, but to me it was more precious than any diamond. "I don't know what to say," he whispered, "so I'll just ask. Will you build this family with me again? Not starting over, but continuing from where we left off. I nodded, tears of joy falling freely. Mummy and Papa have to kiss, Sophie squealed, making us both laugh. Julian pulled her into his arms, then wrapped his other arm around me, completing the circle. Outside, the gentle breeze sent a shower of pink bougainvillea petals onto the porch, like confetti for a wedding with no invitations and no music, but more warmth than any I could have dreamed of. I looked up at the sky and whispered a thank you. A thank you for this gentle ending after such a long storm. A thank you that the man from my past was not an old wound, but the person patient enough to wait for me to heal, so he could walk with me into a new life. And this time, there would be no looking back.